I was still holding the cold bottle of Pellegrino when I heard my stepson through the smart speakers say, "Yeah, the old man's codes are deleted. He's got nowhere to go." And my wife, Susan, my wife, laughed. For a second, my whole body forgot how to move. The Phoenix heat was a living thing, pressing down at 105 degrees, baking the concrete driveway beneath my Italian loafers. The air smelled like creosote and sun-scorched stone, that dry, mineral bite that never leaves the desert no matter how much you water the landscaping. I stood 20 feet from my own front door, floor-to-ceiling glass and brushed steel, a masterpiece I'd spent 2 years designing, and I couldn't get in. My fingers tightened around the green glass bottle, condensation running warm against my palm. I'd picked it up at the AJ's Fine Foods on Camelback because I thought, stupidly, that maybe we could have one normal evening. A small gesture, like you do when a marriage has been hollow for months and you don't want to admit it out loud. Kenneth's voice came through the exterior speaker again. Casual. Too casual. "Yeah," he said, low and almost bored. "Changed the biometrics this morning. He won't even get past the gate." He chuckled like somebody had complimented his shoes. Then there was Susan's voice, not faint, not distant. Clear through the intercom, close enough that my throat tightened. Bright, cheerful, not shocked, not horrified. "You're sure he can't override it?" she asked. My vision narrowed. That one question, "You're sure he can't override it?" hit harder than the lockout itself. Not "how could you?" Not "this is cruel," just making sure the plan was airtight. Kenneth shifted somewhere inside, and I saw his silhouette through the glass. Broad shoulders, that ridiculous silk shirt, head tilted like he was checking stock prices. He was probably holding his phone, scrolling, dismissive. "I'm sure," he said. "You said you wanted him out." "Well, he's out." There was a pause. I waited for my wife to say my name. To say, "Kenneth, stop." To say, "Aaron built this house with his bare hands." To say anything that sounded like a conscience. She didn't. She exhaled into the intercom, and it sounded like relief. "Good," she said. "The realtor's coming Thursday. I built this house to last forever. 60 years I've spent drafting lines, pouring foundations, engineering structures that could survive earthquakes, monsoons, and the brutal Arizona sun. This estate, perched on the red rock face of Camelback Mountain, was supposed to be my legacy. For thousands square feet of glass, steel, and stone, integrated into the landscape like it grew there. Smart systems I programmed myself, back when smart home meant you were the only one smart enough to build it. I designed it to be a fortress. I just never thought I'd be the one locked outside. Susan and I have been married for 8 years. Long enough for me to ignore the warning signs. Long enough for me to pretend that her son, Kenneth, a 34-year-old man-child in designer sneakers who's never held a job longer than 6 months, wasn't slowly poisoning everything I'd built. Long enough to convince myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as having a marriage. But peace, I've learned, is just another word for surrender. And I'm an architect. I understand foundations. I understand when a structure is compromised, when the weight-bearing walls have been hollowed out from the inside, when a controlled demolition is the only option left. Kenneth thinks he's won because he changed a lock, but I didn't build this house with locks. I built it with code. With systems, with redundancies and fail-safes and hidden access points that a punk in a silk shirt could never imagine. I built it to be impenetrable from the outside. Kenneth just made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed I'd stay outside. Through the glass, I can see him now, sprawled on my Corbusier sofa, feet up, sipping what's probably my 25-year Macallan. Susan sits beside him, her turquoise jewelry catching the recessed lighting I spent 3 weeks positioning perfectly. They're laughing, comfortable, victorious. They think I'm confused, diminished. A man past his prime who won't fight back. They're half right. I won't fight. I'll rebuild, starting with the deed. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. I stood at the gate for another 20 minutes, testing my options like a man checking load-bearing walls for cracks. The first attempt was the keypad. I punched in the 6-digit code I'd programmed 3 years ago. My father's birthday, then my mother's. The screen blinked red. Access denied. The second attempt was the biometric scanner. I pressed my thumb against the glass reader, the one I'd installed myself, calibrated to my exact fingerprint ridges. The light cycled from blue to red. User not recognized. The third attempt was the intercom. I pressed the button and heard the chime echo through the house. Through the glass, I could see Kenneth look up from his sofa, glance at the screen mounted on the wall, and smile. He reached for the remote. "Hello." His voice came through the speaker, dripping with false concern. "Can I help you?" I kept my tone level. "Kenneth, open the door." "I'm sorry, sir," he said, and I could hear the grin. "Do I know you?" My jaw tightened. "This is my house. This house belongs to the Brown Family Trust," he said slowly, like he was talking to a child. "And I'm a trustee. So unless you have an appointment, I am Aaron Brown." "Oh," he laughed, genuine and delighted. "Aaron, right? Sorry, man. I didn't recognize you out there in the heat. You okay? You look a little confused." I stared at the camera lens above the door. "Open it. Now." "Can't do that," he said. "Security protocols. Mom's orders." "She's worried about you, you know? Says you've been forgetting things. Wandering off. She thinks maybe it's time to talk about options." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Where is Susan?" "She's resting. Doctor said she needs to avoid stress." He paused. "Unlike you, apparently. You've been gone 3 days, Aaron. Didn't tell anyone where you were going. Didn't answer your phone. That's not normal behavior for a 60-year-old man." I'd been in Sedona. A short trip to meet with a potential client about a cliffside build. I told Susan exactly where I was going. I'd left the itinerary on the kitchen counter. But Kenneth wasn't interested in facts. "I'll be back," I said. Sure, Kenneth said. "Hey, maybe bring some ID next time? Something with your name on it? Just so we know it's really you." The speaker clicked off. I turned and walked back to my car. A silver Audi A8 parked in the guest area outside the gate, because apparently I was a guest now. The leather seats were hot enough to sear skin. I didn't care. I sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching the house shimmer in the heat. Controlled demolition, I reminded myself. Not an explosion. Precision. I started the engine and drove. By the time I returned an hour later with a locksmith, Susan had already called neighbors. The locksmith, a wiry man named Jorge with forearms like rebar, was halfway through examining the gate mechanism when Helen Morgenstern appeared on the sidewalk. Helen lived 3 houses down in a territorial-style adobe she'd paid too much for in 2019. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and an expression of deep concern. "Aaron," she called, shading her eyes. "Is everything all right?" I stepped away from Jorge and met her at the property line. "Just a malfunction with the gate, Helen. Nothing to worry about." "Oh." She hesitated, glancing at the house. "It's just that Susan called me this morning. She said you've been having some episodes." The word landed like a stone in still water. "Episodes. Memory trouble," Helen said gently, lowering her voice like she was discussing a terminal diagnosis. "She said you've been getting confused, forgetting where you put things, forgetting conversations." She touched my arm. "Aaron, there's no shame in it. My mother had early onset Alzheimer's. We caught it at 62. If you need help." "I don't have Alzheimer's," I said. Of course. But her eyes said she didn't believe me. "Still, maybe you should see someone, just to be safe." Susan mentioned there's a wonderful memory care facility in Scottsdale, very upscale, lots of natural light. "Helen," I said, and my voice must have carried an edge because she stopped mid-sentence. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. The only thing confused here is the security system." She stepped back, wounded. "I'm just trying to help." "I know." Jorge called from a gate. "Mr. Brown? I can override the lock, but I'll need to drill through the housing. It's going to damage the mechanism." "Do it," I said. Helen watched, arms folded, as Jorge pulled out a cordless drill. The bit whined against steel. It took 6 minutes to breach the lock, and by the time he was done, 2 more neighbors had appeared, Christopher from across the street and the Chins from the corner lot. Christopher approached me with his hands in his pockets, uncomfortable. "Hey, Aaron, Susan asked me to keep an eye out. Said you might be having a hard time." "I'm not having a hard time, Christopher." Right. He nodded too quickly. "It's just, she said if we saw you trying to break in." "Break in?" I repeated. "That we should maybe call someone. For your safety." Mrs. Chun joined us, her face a mask of sympathy. "Aaron, dear, is there someone we can call? A family member? A doctor?" I looked at the three of them, standing there in the heat, their concern genuine, but their conclusions already drawn. Susan had done her work well. In their minds, I was already gone. A confused old man who couldn't find his keys, who'd forgotten where he lived, who needed to be gently guided into a facility with soft walls and scheduled medication. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Jorge finished drilling and swung the gate open with a metallic groan. I paid him in cash, added a generous tip, and drove through before anyone could stop me. As I pulled up to the front entrance, I saw Susan watching from the living room window, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't open the door. I didn't fight it. Not then. Instead, I drove to Old Town Scottsdale, to the small studio I'd kept since before Susan, before Kenneth, before any of this. A single-room office above an art gallery on Main Street, filled with drafting tables and file cabinets, and the smell of old paper. No one knew about this place. I'd kept the lease under my practice's corporate name, paid annually, never mentioned it. It was my foundation, the one structure they couldn't touch. I unlocked the door and stepped into the cool, dim interior. The trust documents were in the third filing cabinet, in a folder labeled Paradise Valley Estate, Legal. I pulled the file and spread the papers across the drafting table, tracing the timeline with my finger. The original deed, purchased in 2015, title in my name alone. The construction permits, filed 2016 to 2018, all under Aaron Brown, sole proprietor. The trust agreement, executed in 2019, 1 year after I married Susan. A standard revocable living trust, with me as grantor and trustee. Susan was named as a beneficiary. Kenneth was not. But there was something else, something I'd added 2 years ago when I first started noticing the cracks. A quitclaim deed, never recorded, that converted my ownership to a life estate with remainder interest. Legal language that essentially meant I retained control of the property for my lifetime, with specific provisions that allowed me to revoke beneficiary rights in cases of waste, fraud, or attempted conversion. I drafted it after Kenneth moved in. A precaution. Insurance. I'd never told Susan it existed. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, uploading them to an encrypted cloud server I maintained separately from my regular accounts. Then I locked the originals back in the cabinet and sat down at the drafting table. The smart home system had always been my pride. I'd built it from scratch in 2017, before Google and Amazon turned smart home into a commodity. Custom programming, custom interfaces, designed specifically for the property's unique architecture and my particular needs. Kenneth had changed the front-end access codes, the stuff you see on screens and keypads. But he'd never touched the back end, the server architecture, the root access, because he didn't know it existed. I opened my laptop and connected to a VPN, then navigated to an IP address I'd memorized years ago. A login screen appeared. Plain text, no graphics, just a cursor blinking in a command line interface. I typed my credentials. The system accepted them immediately. And just like that, I was inside my own house. The surveillance logs were comprehensive. Every camera, every microphone, every motion sensor, all of it feeding into a central server housed in a climate-controlled closet in the basement. Kenneth didn't know about the closet because it wasn't on the architectural plans I'd given the county. It was a feature I'd added during construction, a private space for mechanical systems, and, yes, a server rack. I scrolled through the timestamp logs from the past 3 days. Kenneth and Susan had been busy. Day 1, 3:47 p.m. Kenneth enters the master bedroom, begins searching through my desk drawers. Day 1, 4:23 p.m. Susan joins him. They discuss finding the real estate documents. Day 2, 10:15 a.m. Kenneth makes a phone call from my study. I click the audio file. His voice came through tinny but clear. Yeah, it's a premium property. 4,000 square feet, Camelback Mountain views, smart home integration. I'm thinking we list it at 4.2 million, take offers over 3.8. How much is your commission on that? Yeah. No, the owner's not a problem. He's incapacitated. Early dementia. We've got medical documentation. My hand stilled on the keyboard. Medical documentation. Day 2, 2:34 p.m. Susan on the phone in the kitchen. Dr. Weaver. Yes, thank you for seeing me on short notice. I need a letter documenting my husband's cognitive decline. For legal purposes, can you backdate it to last month? I know it's irregular, but yes. Yes, I understand. Thank you. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Day 3, 9:08 a.m. Kenneth and Susan in the living room. I expanded the video feed and watched them sitting on the couch together, relaxed, confident. Kenneth was saying, the realtor wants to do a showing Thursday. I told him to bring serious buyers only. Cash offers. Susan, what about Aaron? Kenneth, what about him? He doesn't have keys. He doesn't have access. And if he shows up making a scene, we call the cops, show them the doctor's letter, and they take him to a psych hold. Either way, he's out of the picture. Susan, and the house sells. Kenneth, and we split the proceeds. Just like we talked about. Susan smiled. I knew you'd figure it out. I closed the laptop. The desert outside the studio window was turning orange, the sun beginning its descent behind the McDowell Mountains. I sat there in the quiet, letting the pieces fall into place. They weren't just locking me out. They were erasing me, building a narrative of incompetence and decline, creating paper trails that would stand up in court, positioning themselves to take everything I'd built and convert it to cash. Kenneth needed money. Susan wanted freedom, and I was the obstacle. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. David Kellerman's office was on the 20th floor of a glass tower in downtown Phoenix, with views that stretched from South Mountain to Camelback. He was 73, sharp as a blade, and had a reputation for making opposing counsel cry. He also owed me a favor. I designed his house in Paradise Valley for half my usual fee when he was going through his second divorce. Aaron Brown, he said when I walked in at 8 a.m. the next morning. I thought you'd retired. I did. So this is personal. Extremely. I laid out the situation in 15 minutes. The lockout, the gaslight, the forged medical documentation, the plan to sell the house out from under me. I showed him the surveillance footage, the audio recordings, the text of Kenneth's phone calls. David watched it all without expression, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. How much do you want? I want my house back. I want Kenneth arrested. And I want Susan served with divorce papers inside a property she no longer has access to. Poetic, David said. Expensive but poetic. I can afford it. He smiled. I know you can. All right. First move is a notice of Lis Pendens. We file it today, record it with the county by close of business. The moment it hits the record, that property becomes unsellable. Any buyer who runs a title search will see there's a legal dispute, and no title company will insure the transaction. How long does it take? To file? 2 hours. To record? Another 3. He pulled up a form on his computer. I'll also draft an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against Kenneth and Susan, prohibiting them from accessing the property or disposing of any assets. We'll argue fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft by conversion. They have a doctor's letter, I said. Then we'll get you evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists and submit their findings to the court. I assume you're not actually suffering from dementia? No. Then this should be straightforward. He started typing. I'll also prepare a criminal referral for the county attorney. Forgery, fraud, attempted grand theft. Kenneth's phone calls are a gift. He's literally recorded himself confessing to the scheme. I watched him work, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the confidence of a man who'd built a career on precision. "One more thing," I said. "The life estate deed. Can we record that?" David paused. "You have a life estate on the property? Drafted 2 years ago. Never recorded. Do you have Susan's signature on it?" "No. It was executed unilaterally as part of my estate planning." He considered this. "We can record it, but it won't override her interest as a beneficiary of the trust unless we can prove the trust itself is invalid or that she's forfeited her rights through misconduct. The misconduct is documented." "Then let's bury them in paper," David said. "I'll have everything ready by noon." By 4 p.m., the notice of Lis Pendens was recorded with the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. The document was now public record, a cloud on the title that would appear in any search. By 5 p.m., Kenneth's realtor called him. I listened to the conversation through my backdoor server access, sitting in my studio with headphones on. The realtor's voice was strained. "Kenneth, we have a problem. I just pulled the prelim title report for the listing, and there's a Lis Pendens filed this morning. It says there's a legal dispute over ownership." "Kenneth, what? That's impossible. I'm a trustee." "Realtor, I don't know what to tell you, but until this is resolved, I can't list the property. No buyer will touch it." "Kenneth, who filed it?" "Realtor, someone named Aaron Brown." There was a long silence. Then Kenneth said, very quietly, "I'll handle it." The line went dead. I took off the headphones and leaned back in my chair, watching the sun set over the city. The sky was turning purple and gold, the desert cooling, the heat finally breaking. Kenneth thought he'd locked me out. But he just locked himself in, and I was about to bring the whole structure down around him. The psychiatric evaluation took place in a medical building off Shea Boulevard, in a suite with cream-colored walls and abstract desert art that was supposed to be calming but wasn't. Dr. Patricia Hoffman was 50-something with steel-gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen every manipulation, every performance, every desperate attempt to game the system. David had chosen her specifically because she was impossible to fool. "Mr. Brown," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I understand you're here voluntarily to establish cognitive baseline testing." "That's correct. Your attorney mentioned there have been allegations of memory impairment and confusion." "Can you tell me about that?" I told her everything. The lockout, Susan's calls to the neighbors, the fabricated doctor's letter, Kenneth's plan to have me declared incompetent. I spoke clearly, chronologically, without emotion. Just facts laid out like architectural drawings. She took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Then the testing began. 4 hours of cognitive assessment. Memory exercises where she'd show me lists of words, images, number sequences, and ask me to recall them minutes or hours later. Problem-solving tasks involving patterns and spatial reasoning. Executive function tests that measure my ability to plan, organize, and execute complex tasks. Language assessments. Attention spans. Processing speed. She asked me to draw a clock showing 3:40. I drew it perfectly. She asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I did it without hesitation. She showed me 3 objects, a pen, a watch, a key, then had me recall them after a 20-minute conversation about my career. I named all 3 and added the brand of the pen, the make of the watch, and the fact that the key was a Schlage SC1. By the 3rd hour, she'd stopped taking notes and was simply observing. "Tell me about the house you designed," she said. So I did. I described the load-bearing structure, the cantilever over the mountain face, the geothermal cooling system, the photovoltaic integration, the smart home architecture I programmed myself. I explained how the glass was triple-paned with a low-E coating to reduce heat gain, how the steel frame was designed to flex during seismic events, how the whole structure was essentially a machine that responded to environmental inputs. I talked for 20 minutes without pausing, without losing my thread, citing measurements and specifications from memory. When I finished, Dr. Hoffman sat back in her chair. "Mr. Brown, I'm going to be frank with you. In 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen cognitive function this sharp in someone your age. Your memory is exceptional. Your executive function is well above average. Your spatial reasoning is in the superior range. If you have dementia, then I need to retire because I clearly don't know what dementia looks like. Can you put that in writing? She smiled. I'll have the full report to your attorney by tomorrow morning. And Mr. Brown? I'm also going to include a note that the allegations against you appear to be part of a targeted harassment campaign designed to facilitate financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Which in this case is ironic because you're the least vulnerable person I've assessed this month. I stood and shook her hand. Thank you, doctor. One more thing, she said. The depression and anxiety screening came back negative, but I noticed some guardedness in your responses about your marriage. Are you safe at home? I don't have a home right now, I said, but I will soon. Kenneth moved the auction up to Wednesday. I watched him make the calls from my studio, headphones on, laptop screen divided into 4 camera feeds. He was in my study, pacing, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with desperation. No, I need it this week, he was saying. Thursday's too late. Wednesday afternoon. Yes, I know it's short notice, but the property's ready and I've got serious buyers lined up. What's the commission on a $3.8 million sale? Right? So make it happen. In the kitchen, Susan was pouring herself a 3rd glass of wine. It was 11 a.m. Kenneth ended the call and joined her, leaning against the granite counter I'd selected from a quarry in Vermont. It's done, he said. Auction's Wednesday at 2 p.m. Private showing, invitation only. I've got 6 buyers confirmed. Susan looked nervous. What about Aaron? What about him? The Lis Pendens doesn't stop us from showing the property. And even if he shows up, what's he going to do? The doors don't open for him. The gates don't recognize him. He's a ghost. He hired a lawyer. So what? Lawyers take weeks. We'll have this sold and the money transfer before any judge even looks at the paperwork. Kenneth pulled out his phone and started scrolling. I already found a buyer for the Scottsdale condo. We'll be in Cabo by next Monday. Susan drank her wine and said nothing. I made a note of the timeline. Wednesday, 2 p.m., 72 hours. I had work to do. The ventilation tunnels had been my idea during construction. The house was built into the mountain, which meant traditional HVAC wouldn't work. The ductwork would be too long, the air pressure too inconsistent. So I designed a passive cooling system using natural convection and a series of underground tunnels that pulled cool air from the shaded north face and exhausted hot air through roof vents. The main access tunnel was 3 feet wide and ran from a concealed panel in the garage to a hub beneath the great room. From there, smaller ducts branched out to every room in the house. Kenneth had never seen the plans. Susan didn't know they existed. But I crawled through those tunnels 100 times during construction, checking welds and airflow, making adjustments. I could do it again. Tuesday night, 11 p.m., I parked 2 blocks away and walked to the property in darkness. The neighborhood was silent, just the hum of air conditioners and the distant bark of a dog. I wore dark clothes and soft-soled shoes and carried a small backpack with tools. The garage had an exterior access panel hidden behind a decorative stone planter. I moved the planter, removed the panel, and slid into the tunnel. The air was cool and still, smelling of concrete and dust. I used a pen light to navigate, crawling on my hands and knees through the narrow passage. My shoulders scraped the walls. My knees protested against the hard surface. But I designed this. I knew every turn, every junction, every vertical shaft. 15 minutes later, I was beneath the great room. I could hear them above me. Kenneth's voice, then Susan's, then the sound of footsteps on the marble floor I'd imported from Italy. Everything's set for tomorrow, Kenneth was saying. Buyers arrive at 2. Champagne, caviar, the whole show. We'll have offers by 4. And if Aaron shows up, he won't get past the gate. I waited until their footsteps receded, then pushed up the access panel. A 2-foot square of floor that looked like solid marble, but was actually a lightweight composite on hidden hinges. I emerged in the corner of the great room, behind the Nakashima credenza. The house was dark except for the under-cabinet lighting in the kitchen. I moved silently through the space, muscle memory guiding me through furniture I'd placed, across floors I'd leveled, under ceilings I'd designed. My study was on the second floor, accessible by a floating staircase made of steel and white oak. I climbed slowly, testing each step for creaks. At the top, I paused. Kenneth's bedroom was to the left, door closed. Susan's was to the right. They'd been sleeping separately for months. My study was straight ahead. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was wrong. My desk had been rifled through, papers scattered, drawers left open. My shelves had been emptied of the architectural books I'd collected over 40 years. Even my drafting table had been moved, shoved against the wall to make room for Kenneth's gaming setup. 3 monitors, LED lights, an expensive chair. I felt something dark move through me, but I pushed it down. Focus. I went to the built-in bookshelf on the west wall and counted 7 shelves down for books from the left. A leather-bound copy of The Architecture of Country Houses by Andrew Jackson Downing. First edition, 1850. I pulled it out. Behind it was a small safe, flush-mounted in the wall, hidden behind a false panel. 4-digit combination lock. I spun the dial, my father's birth year, and it clicked open. Inside was a thumb drive. I placed it there 6 months ago, after I'd started noticing discrepancies in our financial accounts. Bank statements that didn't match my records. Transfers I hadn't authorized. Signatures on documents that looked like mine, but weren't quite right. I'd hired a forensic accountant, a former FBI guy who specialized in white-collar crime. He'd found everything. Forged signatures on loan applications. Unauthorized wire transfers. A line of credit Kenneth had opened in my name using a power of attorney document I'd never signed. All of it was on this drive. Scanned documents. Expert analysis. Side-by-side signature comparisons. Proof. I pocketed the drive, closed the safe, replaced the book. Then I heard a door open down the hall. I froze. Footsteps. Slow. Unsteady. Susan, probably heading to the bathroom. I moved quickly back to the study door and slipped behind it, pressing myself against the wall. The footsteps passed. A light came on in the bathroom. Water ran. I counted to 60, then moved. Down the stairs. Across the great room. Back to the access panel. I dropped into the tunnel and pulled the panel closed above me. As I crawled back toward the garage, I could hear Susan above me, walking through the house, her footsteps echoing through the structure like a heartbeat. Wednesday, 1:45 p.m. I sat in my Audi across the street, watching luxury cars pull through the gate. A white Bentley. A black Range Rover. A Tesla Model X. A silver Porsche Cayenne. Kenneth had gone all out. There was a valet taking keys, a bartender setting up a champagne station on the patio, catering staff carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. Through my laptop, connected to the house's surveillance system, I watched Kenneth greet the buyers. He wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost $3,000, charging my Amex, no doubt. He was smiling, confident, playing the role of successful heir managing his aging father's estate. Susan stood beside him in a cream-colored dress and those turquoise earrings, playing the concerned wife. The buyers circulated through the great room, admiring the view, commenting on the architectural details, asking questions about square footage and property taxes and HOA fees. A woman in her 50s, dripping in diamonds. This is exquisite. How long has it been on the market? Kenneth. It's a private sale. My father built it, but he's no longer able to maintain it. We're looking for the right buyer who'll appreciate the craftsmanship. A man in his 40s, tech CEO type. Smart home integration. Kenneth, fully integrated. Everything's controlled through a central system. Lights, climate, security, entertainment. State of the art. I smiled. At 2:15, Kenneth called for everyone's attention. The buyers gathered in the great room, champagne glasses in hand. Thank you all for coming, Kenneth said. We're going to start the bidding at $3.8 million. This is a unique opportunity to own a one-of-a-kind architectural masterpiece in one of Phoenix's most exclusive. I pressed a button on my laptop. The lights went out. All of them. Every bulb, every fixture, every LED strip. The house went dark. There were gasps, confused murmurs. Someone's champagne glass hit the floor and shattered. Kenneth's voice strained. It's fine, it's just, hold on, let me. I pressed another button. The security shutters began to close. Heavy steel panels descended over every window, blocking out the afternoon sun, sealing the house like a vault. Now there was panic. What's happening? Kenneth, what? Get these open. I pressed a third button. The front door's locked. The gates sealed. Every exit secured. Then I turned on the projector. A white square of light appeared on the main wall of the great room, and then an image, a scanned document. A loan application with my forged signature. Date stamped. Notarized. Fraudulent. Kenneth's voice. Turn that off. Who's doing this? I switched to the next image. A wire transfer authorization. Another forgery. $20,000 moved from my account to an offshore LLC registered in Kenneth's name. Then audio. Kenneth's voice through the speakers, crystal clear. Yeah, it's a premium property. The owner's not a problem. He's incapacitated. Early dementia. We got medical documentation. Susan's voice. Dr. Weaver, I need a letter documenting my husband's cognitive decline. For legal purposes. Can you backdate it to last month? Kenneth's voice again. We'll have this sold and the money transferred before any judge even looks at the paperwork. The buyers stood frozen in the darkness, lit only by the projector's glow. I opened the front door using my master override and walked in. The lights came on. All of them. Bright and sudden. Kenneth spun around, his face white. Hello, Kenneth, I said. Susan made a small sound, like air escaping from a punctured tire. I walked to the center of the room and addressed the buyers. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm the owner of this property. This man has no authority to sell it. The documents he's presented are fraudulent. The medical claims he's made are false. And I've already contacted the authorities. As if on cue, red and blue lights appeared outside, strobing through the reopened shutters. The police had arrived. Kenneth was arrested on 6 counts. Forgery, fraud, grand theft, identity theft, elder abuse, and attempted real estate fraud. The detectives had reviewed the evidence I provided. The surveillance footage, the forged documents, the forensic accounting report, and obtained a warrant within 3 hours. They handcuffed him in front of the buyers, read him his rights in front of the catering staff, and walked him out past the champagne station he'd charged my credit card. Susan wasn't arrested. Not immediately. But she was served with papers, a restraining order, a motion to freeze her access to our joint accounts, and a petition for divorce on grounds of fraud and conspiracy. She stood in the foyer, papers in hand, as her son was loaded into a police car. She looked at me once. Just once. I looked back. She left without a word. 3 months later, Kenneth took a plea deal. 8 years, eligible for parole in 5. The prosecutor had wanted to push for 15, but Kenneth's public defender convinced him to cooperate, to provide evidence of other schemes, other victims. Apparently my stepson had been running variations of this con for years. The forged signatures alone were enough to void every document he'd touched. The life estate deed I drafted stood unchallenged. Susan's interest in the trust was revoked by court order. The divorce was finalized in 6 weeks. Susan didn't contest it. She couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming, and David had made it clear that if she fought, he'd pursue criminal charges for conspiracy. She moved to Sedona, to a small condo purchased with what was left of her savings after legal fees. I heard she stopped wearing turquoise. Now I sit on my patio as the sun sets over the valley, the city lights beginning to glow like embers in the desert below. The temperature has dropped to a perfect 72 degrees, and there's a breeze coming off the mountain that smells like sage and rain. The house is quiet. No Kenneth playing video games at 2 a.m. No Susan's endless phone calls with her book club friends, complaining about things that don't matter. No footsteps I don't recognize. No voices that don't belong. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after demolition, after the rubble is cleared, after the ground is leveled and ready for something new. I've started sketching again. Small projects at first, a meditation pavilion for a client in Tucson, a guest house in Flagstaff. But I'm thinking bigger now. thinking about what comes next. Because here's what I learned. Structures fail when the foundation is compromised, when the weight distribution is wrong, when the materials aren't what they're supposed to be. But they can be rebuilt. Stronger. Better. With better materials this time. The lights of Phoenix stretch out below me, a grid of streets and lives and stories, all of them built on something. Hope, love, ambition, greed. I built mine on precision, on understanding how things work, how they fail, how they endure. Kenneth changed the locks while I was away. So I changed something bigger. I changed the foundation itself. And now, finally, this house is mine again. Thank you for watching.